The Citizen Mike Show. News. Commentary. Interviews. The Citizen Mike Show starts now.
Hey, welcome to the Citizen Mike Show. Thanks for tuning in. We do appreciate it. My name is Mike Brodinski, and on my right is Rick Hendershot, Director of Wallingford Public Utilities. Rick, welcome back to Citizen Mike Show. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike. Happy to be here.
Well, the reason why we dragged you in is there are two topics that have been blazing on headlines in the Hartford Courant, New Haven Register, affecting electricity rates and costs. And when we see these two headlines, two different topics, we wanted to talk to you about it. The first topic that's been covered has been the possibility, not probability, but the possibility of rolling blackouts, electricity power blackouts in Connecticut. We wanted to talk to you about that and whether it could impact Wallingford. And the other topic is the increase in electricity rates, especially with Eversource and United illuminating, but Wallingford's not immune to that too. So we wanted to talk to you about rates. Let's talk about blackouts. Could Wallingford, if things go poorly, experience blackouts this winter?
Yes, with all the caveats that you just mentioned, if everything that could go wrong does go wrong.
So walk us through what it would take and what those blackouts would look like.
Okay, well, I'll answer the second part first.
Yeah.
If it came to that and Wallingford were instructed by the grid operator to reduce load in that manner, we would select the amount of our system that matches the percentage of load that they are requiring everybody to drop and do so for about an hour.
Okay, let me stop you. I want to take this slowly, and I'm going to fictionalize this a little bit, be a little playful here.
Sure.
Phone rings. Hello, Rick Hendershot, Director of Public Utilities. Wallingford Electric Division, I want you to shut off power. Is that how it works?
That's very overly simplistic. What
Agreed.
happens is there'd be steps before that.
Okay.
Where there's a large operational procedure that's put together and administered by the independent system operator New England through their various control regions. And we answer to a control region called CONVEX, which is abbreviation for the Connecticut Valley Exchange. And they oversee grid operations in Connecticut and Western Massachusetts. And so we would get notices about the beginnings of the operating procedure 4. The independent system operator sees that load is headed towards possibly exceeding the capability of the generation fleet in the region.
So everybody's got to back off.
Yes, and they take other steps first. There's public appeals, and if we got all the way to we're starting to look at load interruptions, the governors of the 6 New England states would be on the airwaves making public appeals for people to reduce loads, for business and industry to curtail or cut back, et cetera. If all of those things don't happen, and then ISO is also going to do everything they can to increase imports from neighboring regions that might have surplus and ask everything that can run to run. And if even that doesn't get it all done, then they would order
So,
involuntary load reduction.
So I'm going to put this in my own layman's language here. What I'm hearing is there's a run-up. There's sort of a preparation phase, and everyone is sort of like a yellow flag, an almost red flag. I mean, you're gradually alerted this is going to happen.
Correct.
But everyone's hoping it's not going to happen. How much time do you have between that order, reduce load, shut down part of your system for a while? How much lead
if
time?
it got to that.
Yeah, it got to that.
Well, if it got to the step between, how long is it between we get to the step that is involuntary load reduction and they expect the load to come off?
Yeah.
Minutes.
Minutes.
Yes.
So my fictitious phone call, maybe it's an email or electronic communication, it'll say shut down immediately.
But there will have been many steps before
Understood.
that. Yeah.
No,
yes,
understood.
when we get to that step, yes,
Yeah.
it will be, okay, we're now at step such and such, you need to reduce load by X%.
Okay, now, I'm being a devil's advocate. Well, not devil's advocate, but I'm still going to be playful with you. But we're Wallingford. We have our own electric division. Why do we have to do this? I mean, we're a unique entity. We have walls built around town that says, Wallingford is a, independent entity. We have our own electric division. Why do we have to comply?
Because we operate inside the energy and capacity markets of the independent system operator in New England. We're in the same sandbox as everybody else in New England. We are signatory to operating and market agreements. It's so we could be our own entity.
So you can't say no.
Correct.
You can't say no. Okay. So I want to see if you can bargain with them. Suppose you say, well, wait a minute. You want us to shut down. I'm going to make up an hour because I think you mentioned that first as an approximate, kind of a realistic thing. And you say, well, I want to keep our hospitals powered, fire departments powered, police department powers. You could do that.
Yes, we could not interrupt the circuits that supply critical facilities.
Okay.
And those circuits are at the end of the list.
All right. So is there a plan in place now that the electric division has for prioritizing who gets turned off first and who gets turned off last?
Well, it's not prioritizing. I'd hesitate to use that word.
Okay.
It's schedule. Yes, there is a script in place, for lack of a better word, that if the call came, this is where we'd begin, and we'd progress through in this order until we got the word from ISO to cease that operation.
Okay, and supposing now you get alerted on this run-up process, these gradual steps that bring it to this shut-off point. What would the Public Utilities Commission do with respect to alerting residents in advance, or would that be unduly alarmist and you wouldn't do that? How would that work?
Well, to use your words, I'm not sure it would be unduly alarmist, but we just don't have the communications capability. And I'm not sure it would be necessary, and I'll say it for this reason.
Yeah.
ISO actually began the steps of the operating procedure number 4 on Christmas Eve.
And no one knew.
And no one knew because no one had to know because it did not get to even the beginning steps of load interruption, or even there's a step prior to that that's called voltage reduction. The system will lower its voltage by a certain percentage point, and a little bit of energy is reduced that way.
So this is not hypothetical. This process began New Year's Eve.
Yes.
Could you walk us through what you saw New Year's Eve?
I'm sorry, I said New Year's.
I mean Christmas.
It was Christmas Eve. It was
right,
Christmas
right.
Eve. Well, I was alerted by the electric division, who was alerted by Convex, and told that the beginning steps had started, and so
started towards a blackout.
Well, started down. It's all the steps of Operation 4. Like I said, Operating Procedure 4 had begun, and the initial steps were taking place.
Yeah.
And what that entailed was checking with neighboring regions about imports, and what I've subsequently learned about Christmas Eve is that imports were lower than typical and lower than expected for
Imports of power
into the region.
into the Connecticut and New England region.
Into New England, yes.
Yeah.
And ISO's forecast was low because service restoration from the storm that had taken place the day before and thus had suppressed load on December 24th was happening faster than they expected. Load was coming back on quicker than they anticipated. And there were a couple, I don't think many, but a few unplanned generation outages.
All right.
And that all added up to what looked to ISO to be a capacity shortage. Also, natural gas got very expensive that day. And so a lot of gas-fired generation was now what's called out of merit. Their price had gotten so high they weren't being selected first, and oil-fired units were being selected to run.
All right. So that's just money. The cost, that's just cost. That's just money. But I want to go back to the cause of this. How could it be that there would be the potential for blackouts in Connecticut? What is the cause of this?
Well, it was more than Connecticut. It would have been region-wide. The 6 New England states operate as one tight power pool.
Okay.
And so the energy markets, as administered by ISO, work on I don't know exactly what the term of art is, but the next least expensive unit comes on as the load comes up. As you know, electric generation and electric load has to be balanced constantly because electricity is consumed the instant it's created.
Sure.
And so you have to have that balance just right or the grid becomes unstable. And so, as I said, the forecast was low, so some units that would normally have been running weren't running and therefore possibly weren't prepared to run because they didn't think they'd be called because of economics and the load forecast and all that implies.
So here's what I'm reading, and this is sort of a question to you. I'm going to give you sort of a basic scenario, and elaborate on my comment if it needs to be correct me, if it needs to be corrected, and so on. But as I understand it, the power generating plants gobble natural gas. Most of them, let me correct myself there. About 50% of the electricity generated in Connecticut, give or take some percentage points, is natural gas generated electricity. Nuclear is in there and some other sources.
Yeah, it's less than 50, but yeah, natural gas and nuclear are typically every bit of half of it, if not a little more.
So that they consume and they gobble natural gas. So they need all the natural gas to generate at their maximum or near maximum output. If they don't get natural gas through a pipeline, then they can't put out their energy. They can't run their generators. Maybe they have liquid natural gas, stored up, or maybe they could use that. But the point is that the pipeline capacity may not or does not always have the capability to deliver natural gas. The natural gas pipelines may not be able to get all that natural gas to these generators, and if they don't have the fuel, they may have to slow down or stop, and that causes a blackout. Am I close?
Close. Yes, in projected highest load scenarios, which is not exactly where the region was on Christmas Eve, the large transmission pipeline network that runs from the south and southwest of the U.S., Louisiana, Texas, Oklahoma, up through the lower Midwest and ultimately into New England, doesn't have enough capacity to supply all of the gas that the gas-fired generating stations would need and supply enough gas to all of the domestic
Right.
gas needs, home heating, cooking, etc.
So some have said, letters to the editor or editorials, we need more electricity generating plants, but that's not the issue. As I
Correct.
understand, it's the gas pipeline. There aren't enough gas pipelines, or the gas pipelines aren't big enough and fat enough to supply what these generators need, and that's what causes
There
the
is,
possibility of a blackout.
as we say in the industry, there's enough spinning metal
Yeah.
in the region to generate all the electricity the region needs. The question is, will there be fuel for it?
Yeah.
And that can be a concern. As yet, I don't understand fully how much, if at all, that was a contributing factor on Christmas Eve.
But that's a scenario everyone's warning about.
Yes.
And that's what's in the news. I want to read you a couple of things and get your reaction. I said that this issue of a blackout, the possibility of a blackout, has been well publicized. And as an example, this is from the New Haven Register, November 1. This was written by Luther Turmel, which many of our viewers know, who was a Wallingford reporter for the New Haven Register back in the day. He's now covering the business beat. It's an in-depth article, but he quotes Eversource. And Eversource said, if we have a really cold winter, there is a potential we could see rolling blackouts. I would encourage people to prepare for the possibility of 1 or 2 hour blocks without electricity. Nolan said, he's the CEO of Eversource, natural gas customers won't face the impact because just the way the contracts are, if you have natural gas for heating, you're guaranteed enough natural gas. But the natural gas contracts don't guarantee the electricity generators all that they need. He said power plant operators whose electric generating units run on natural gas have no guarantee of the fuel being available during periods of peak demand. They purchase what are known as non-firm capacity contracts, which means that in the event of the high demand for natural gas that brings the space in interstate transmission pipelines to near full capacity, the pipeline operators are under no obligation to make sure the power plants get the fuel they need. He talks about a winter problem. Can you help explain why is it a winter problem?
Because of the use of natural gas by homes.
Heating?
Heating.
Yeah. So they're guaranteed to heat their homes, but the electricity generators are not guaranteed all the gas they need to spin the metal.
And those
to
are
spin the turbine.
economic choices that all the different companies make. The local distribution companies for gas service,
Yeah.
it's my understanding, buy firm gas contracts. And so there is space for that gas in the pipeline. The electric generators, to stay competitive in the energy markets and increase their likelihood of being called upon as load increases and ISO needs more generators, and they dispatch on a cost basis, don't buy firm gas because it's much more expensive.
So this is from the ISO website, the Independent System Operator website. They run the grid. They call the shots on this stuff. A lot of good information there, but they say during cold weather, most natural gas is committed to local utilities for residential, commercial, and industrial heating, just as you said. As a result, we are finding that during severe winter weather, many power plants in New England cannot obtain fuel to generate electricity. This has already happened. This is on their website. Cannot obtain fuel. Liquefied natural gas brought to New England by ship from overseas can help fill the gap. But regional liquefied natural gas storage and send-out capability is limited, and its timely arrival depends on long-term weather forecasts, global market prices, and other logistical challenges. Any comment on that? That seems to...
That is my understanding, that especially the last decade or longer, this region has gotten by every winter through the timely delivery of tankers of liquefied natural gas to the Everett Marine Terminal at the mouth of the Mystic River in Boston Harbor. It's effectively the north terminus of the long interstate gas transmission pipelines I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And it's that offloading of that gas which then provides enough gas for the region to get by.
I read an article in the paper yesterday or the day before that the first such liquid natural gas shipment is due to arrive at that Mystic port, like right around now. Usually there'd be more ships coming in, but because of the situation in Europe, where they're paying a lot more money for liquefied natural gas, the suppliers would rather sell it in Europe than send it up the Mystic.
Correct. That's my understanding as well. And what I learned here in the U.S., natural gas storage has caught up with average.
Okay.
It's stored in large underground caverns in the Southwest and then bled into the pipeline as needed. But again, we're at the north end of the pipeline, and there's a lot of takers off the pipeline between there and here.
We're at the end of the line.
So to speak, yes.
All right. So I just came across a chart in my paperwork here from ISO, which shows our dependence on natural gas, which sort of emphasizes the problem. According to this ISO chart, I think effective as of November, 46% of our electricity is generated by natural gas. The fuel is natural gas. Nuclear, 23%, renewables, 10%, other smaller percentages. It all adds up to 100%. I want to read one more thing before we get to related topic. This is a piece from the Connecticut Mirror. It's an opinion piece, and it's written by a representative of the Sierra Club to give their perspective on what's going on. So they write in part, winter after winter, when the cold weather returns, our regional grid operator, ISO New England, issues dire predictions of an energy crisis. And they have this year. The cause, an over-reliance on methane gas for heating and power generation. Skipping. New England imports all methane gas, misleadingly referred to as natural gas, used for electricity generation and building heat. Gas is sent via aging and expensive infrastructure, including pipelines prone to leaks and other harmful incidents to homes and buildings, and to power plants that further pollute the air as the gas is burned to create electricity. Moving away from methane gas, methane gas obviously is more of an inflammatory than natural gas, but we get it. Moving away from methane gas towards renewable energy at ISO New England and in Connecticut is critical for our state to reach its greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. As it currently stands, Connecticut hosts more than our share of power plants and pipelines. Having built more than 40 plants since 1998, our state is home to 54 fossil fuel plants. Excess dirty energy is produced here and exported to our New England neighbors. This is the perspective of the Sierra Club, of course, a well-known conservation, clean air, clean water advocacy group. But it's a perspective that it adds a little bit of information and reinforces. This is a pipeline issue, and the state, subject to your thoughts, is trying to switch over to renewables, solar, wind, and other renewables as quickly as it can. There's hurdles to do that, and during this transition period, we could be in for a rocky road. Do you also sort of see it that way, that we're in a sort of transition?
Well, certainly. And renewables are a fine objective, and I understand, and I'm not unsympathetic to, in this instance, the Sierra Club's
comments,
comments, thank you. But getting back to the comment I made earlier, that electricity is consumed the instant it's made, and you have to have enough machines to make it at every instance. And the energy has to come from somewhere. And solar won't help you at night. And if the wind doesn't blow, the windmills won't produce much electricity. And so where does it come from on a cold winter night in New England? The shift to what they call methane gas, that's just semantics, methane or natural gas. But the switch to natural gas as a fuel source took the region away from coal and oil, demonstrably dirtier and more pollutant, not from a CO2 aspect necessarily, but from other pollutants. That's been the reason there's been so much construction of natural gas generation as the region replaced older, arguably dirtier plants, and as the region's electricity needs grew, natural gas-fired generation was the technology of choice.
Yeah. So finally, on this topic, article again in the New Haven Register, the headline was "Oil, ick, oil helps fill the demand as New England avoids blackouts during the winter storm." The lead sentence is, "Concerns that New England could be crippled by rolling blackouts during severe storms this winter did not become reality when frigid winds struck the region on Christmas Eve, as many power plants were able to rely on fuel oil to meet the holiday weekend's demands, according to the region's grid operator. The switch from natural gas to oil peaked late in the afternoon on Christmas Eve, so on and so forth. During periods of severe cold, when demand for natural gas to heat home peaks, many power plants make the switch to run on oil, while so-called peaker plants come online in order to meet the surging demand for electricity. When natural gas prices are very high, oil generation can become more common." A quick diversion. Pierce plant, is that still a peaker plant? Is that still?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And I'm sure its new owners ran it Christmas Eve on oil.
Yeah. I was intrigued by a map of the gas pipeline situation in Connecticut, because this is not a problem of electricity generators, it's a gas pipeline issue and the capacity of gas pipelines. Bruce, can you put that map up, and it helps visualize what's going on here. It's color coded. I'm not going to get into the color codes, but this is a view of where those major pipelines are, crisscrossing the state north to south and southwest to northeast, so on and so forth. And it's those pipelines that carry gas to the electricity generators, and it's those pipelines that are chock full in the winter months. And then as we get down to the shoreline, I don't know, Rick, maybe you know, is there any gas being imported along the Connecticut shoreline, liquid natural gas, or that?
No, liquefied natural gas, no. There's no LNG terminals in Connecticut.
Got to go to Boston, north of Boston for that.
Yes.
So now I want to talk a little bit about the, Bruce, you can take that down. The spike in electricity prices has been caused, they say, by the spike in natural gas prices. And I wanted to get that defined. What does spike mean? That's bad journalism. We say a spike, it's like surging prices, it's like looming, there's adjectives that really don't help. But Bruce, we got a chart about natural gas prices, and this is just something I dug up from public sources. It's from the federal government's Energy Information Agency. And it shows what they publish as the price of natural gas for industrial users. And I don't know if generators are industrial users, but I pick a chart that seems to make sense. But I wanted to get some numbers behind the claim that natural gas prices have surged. What does surge mean? And this goes through the first 9 months of each year. And that's because in 2022, the first 9 months were the only months available. So I picked the first 9 months of 2020 and 2021 to show what that increase was. And over that 2-year period, it went up about almost 80%, not quite. Price of gas certainly didn't double according to this chart. Bruce, you can take that down. And now, Rick, I want to move over to electricity costs. You ready for that?
Sure.
All right. But rather than start with Wallingford, I want to start with what Eversource is doing, because that's what's grabbing the headlines. And then we'll compare what Wallingford had to do with its prices. So Eversource and United Illuminating also, but I'm going to just focus on Eversource because their price increase was more extreme. Their total bill for residential customers went up about 40 to 50%. Eversource raise prices on residential customers about 40 to 50%. Their electricity bill is made up of categories, components of costs. And the largest is the cost to buy electricity from the generators. That, they said, doubled. And their typical bill now, based on the new Eversource rates that just got published this past week, the typical bill for 750 kilowatts is $266.62. All the publicity is because of the increase in price of natural gas. Well, we put the chart up on the natural gas. It didn't go up 100%, at least according to this chart for industrial users. Wallingford, however, is not immune from these pressures. What did Wallingford do with its price increase to residential customers?
Beginning here on January 1, we raised a factor that appears on every bill. It's called the PCA, the Power Cost Adjustment. And that's a factor it's in our published rates. It's a calculated value that is designed to keep the division whole with the past and near-term future costs of energy and adjust the total charges to customers so that the PCA, in combination with what's already included in our rates for wholesale power, as I said, keeps the division and the customers whole.
So as the price of electricity, as the prices you have to pay go up, you add a surcharge on to the residential customer. That's called a power cost adjustment.
And as if our costs go down, we lower that number. So starting in January, we changed our PCA such that the overall impact to the same kind of customer you mentioned, 750 kilowatt hours in a month, it raised it just a tick over 8%.
Yeah, 8.1%, which compares pretty favorably, right, to 40 to 50%.
Yeah, and I think it was around not quite $10 a
yes,
month, if memory serves.
That's about right. So, therefore, residential customer of the Wallingford Electric Division, your next bill will be a little higher, but not a lot higher. And thank goodness you're not buying from Eversource. Okay, I jiggled around with the numbers that you kindly provided so I could prepare for this episode, and I see that your costs for buying power are going up too. Obviously, they're going up too. As you look out into the future, are you able to ballpark the degree to which electricity costs will be going up? And you pick the time frame that makes sense to you. But what seems to be the trend as you look forward?
Well, overall, the region, the country, it's going to go up.
From where we are now? From where we are now.
Now, right now, Wallingford's particular circumstance, given what we have, what we call hedged, which is the buying of future contracts of energy, the promise to pay a given amount for energy delivered to us in the future in certain quantities, very structured quantities. Our best estimate right now is that the next time we would go to update the PCA, which would be in July, which would be the way to think about the PCA, it's almost like an ongoing true-up. In July, we'll true up we'll look back 6 months from January through the end of June. How well did we do? Did we over or under collect? We factor that in. We look out the next 6 months. What do we think it's going to cost?
Well, that's what I'm trying to get at. Where do you see it going?
We don't think our PCA is going to change very much in July.
Okay.
So our buying has structured things for Wallingford customers such there will be a minor sort of overarching rate increase of about 4% in July. That was the result of a rate study and cost of service analysis a few years ago,
Yeah.
where rates were, and they were vetted publicly. We put them in the paper. There were public meetings, and the PUC voted in public for these rates.
Of course.
And they'll all rates, commercial, industrial, residential, will change. The impact that the residential customer will be about 4% on July 1.
Okay, you mentioned the word hedging, and you explained it. I want to sort of restate it in my layman's language, but it's like futures contracts. You lock in a price now for electricity to be delivered in the future,
That's exactly what we do.
and you go out, 1, 2, or 3 years to do that in various percentages.
Yes.
And so you can keep your thumb on the pulse of what electricity rates are going to be to some degree, because you've already paid now for future to be delivered later on this year or in 2024 to some degree.
Correct.
And how many times, and I'm going to compare to Eversource in a minute, but how many times do you go out each year and pick up blocks of electricity?
It's not pinned down that we have to do it. And I would say a typical year is, three or four purchases a year.
And is it based upon knowledge of the markets, or is it based upon, current market conditions? Your consultant or energy buyer or you feel the time is right, let's buy now, price looks favorable, or is it structured?
It's all of that. We have a risk management and a hedging policy, two separate documents. And the hedging policy dictates firm guardrails where at the end of every given quarter on a running 4-year basis, we are required to be at least so much hedged, but no more than some higher number hedged.
All right.
And so we make sure we stay within that. So that can dictate timing based on how much have we purchased so far and what do those balances look like. Then we're also watching what we call the forward curves, the accumulation of information of other energy purchases that have taken place. It's a very transparent and liquid market. And when transactions take place, we can see those prices. All buyers in our situation can. And in fact, today I got a weekly update of it's a report that our wholesale power supply agent calls the weekly report, and it shows the forward curves for. They didn't put 23 on there for us because we're fully hedged for calendar 23.
Okay.
So they didn't bother to give us that data, but it showed 24 and 25, 26, and now as you get further out, there's less data on which this is based, but they've even gone out as, I believe, as far as 28 already, starting to show those prices.
Right. So the information that I'm going to share with our viewers is about a month old, but it comes from your monthly report. The percentage of amount of electricity purchased already for 2023, as of the date of this report, you've already bought 70%, and now it's more.
Of 2023?
23.
It's 95%.
Okay. So
of our projected energy needs.
Yeah.
Or forecasted energy needs.
But you bought a lot of electricity and you know the price you paid.
Yes.
And as of the date of this report, which again, I'm somewhat dated, for 2024, you already bought half of the power that you need for 2024 estimated.
That sounds right.
And that's probably grown since the date of this report. 2025, you already bought 30%. In 2026, you already bought 10% of that. And what I'm trying to figure out is why Eversource is doing so poorly when compared to what Wallingford is doing. And I know that Eversource sends, they go out to market 4 times a year, very structured. The generators know in advance when they're coming out. It's a dollar cost averaging sort of a system. They go out in fixed times, whether the market is up or down. They hope that by going out at the same time every year, year after year, their average cost is going to be more favorable, but it doesn't seem to be working out that way. But when you were on this show, I think it was about 2 years ago, I asked you, how come Wallingford electric rates are so much lower than Eversource? And we really couldn't come to figure that out. But have things clarified? I mean, what's...
Yeah, I think I understand it better. It's largely, I think, Mike, because of the feature you just described.
Yep.
I also believe, I don't know this to be so, but I think this is correct, that Eversource, since that's who we're talking about, only buys what's called load following contracts, which means they purchase, their agreement with a supplier is for a given percentage of their total load. So I'll just pick a number, 10%. So that could be 10% of a small number in the middle of the night in April. That could be 10% of a big number in a hot afternoon in July.
Yeah.
But they've pushed off on the suppliers the risk of that load shape. And if that load shape takes off at an expensive time, the supplier's holding the bag for that energy cost at that time. If the load is much lower at some point than expected and that supplier overbought, now they've bought long and they're going to sell their extra back into the market at a loss because they've got a surplus and the price just went down. So you can imagine what the risk premiums might be on that product from those suppliers, because they feed their families by getting those bets right.
You say risk premium, and that's a word used by ISO and in polite conversation in public among the regulators and industry, risk premium. I translate that into street talk and I say profiteering and gouging. No comment. I don't want to comment. You don't need to comment. I don't want you to comment. No, I don't want. Even if you wanted to comment, I wouldn't allow you to comment. But it seems as though when natural gas prices do not double within 1 year, yet Eversource's bill for the electricity component doubles within 1 year, the numbers don't add up. And it may be that and people are pointing the finger at Eversource as the culprit, but Eversource has to buy electricity and they pass the cost along, and maybe the electricity generators are jacking up the price, and that's, what'd you call it, risk premium? They're jacking up the price, Eversource has to pay it. But again, the numbers don't add up, and that is causing consternation now among the legislature, the regulators, and everything else.
Let's agree to some terms here
Sure.
also. When you say generators in that instant, it's not really the generators. It's not the plants or the owners of the plants necessarily. It's the large financial institutions that are bridging the gap between the generators and the utilities. That's with whom I'm going to presume Eversource, because that's with whom we do business, is the energy supply wing of what used to be utilities that owned generation fleets.
Yeah.
And other, the polite term is power marketers. That's who our contracts are with. And what they're promising to do is to have available in the region, so that it clears through the ISO markets, power that's in Wallingford's name of given quantities at given prices at given times.
Well, if there was a $1 increase in cost to Eversource, then they buy electricity and there's a $1 increase to Eversource for the electricity component, if they're passing through, as they're obligated to do without a markup, that electricity cost to their customers, it should only go up $1. Or rephrase, if it goes up 10%, the cost to the ultimate consumer should only go up 10% in the bill. But that's not what's happening. There's sort of an anomaly going on that's very hard to explain, and we can't solve it on this episode, and I don't think anyone can solve it. Let me just change the subject and wrap up this topic with a couple of things. This is a summary again from the New Haven Register, and it says utility companies say that sharp increases are the result of a sustained rise in natural gas prices caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Though Governor Ned Lamont, Attorney General William Tong, and other lawmakers have spoken out against the rate increases, the state appears to have little ability in the short term to block them. I just want to take a minute on this episode to clarify. Some people say that Eversource's rates are approved or set by the state regulators. That is more untrue than true. Eversource files its rates, and there's very little that PURA, the Public Utilities Regulatory Administration, can do about it. as very little that the Office of Consumer Counsel can do about it, as they say, quote after quote after quote. Eversource files its rates, and a week later, the state of Connecticut approves them without any close scrutiny. The scrutiny comes later, but it's a sort of a pro forma kind of a thing. You seem uncomfortable with my comment. You disagree with that, or?
I, for lack of a better word, I'm ignorant on that process.
Yeah,
so I'm not in a position to comment on it.
Yeah,
since we are not under pure jurisdiction.
Right.
I don't know anything about how they adjudicate proposed rate changes by the utilities they regulate.
If someone says the state approved these rates, that's more untrue than true. Eversource charges what it needs to, and that sort of ends it. And the public officials, if you read the news stories carefully, are saying that. So going to the office of Governor Ned Lamont, and we're going to close this out, talking about the increase in Eversource rates. He says, I'm disappointed electric distribution utilities are enjoying historic profits at the same time electric generation rates are increasing and customers are experiencing economic hardships. And I call on UI and Eversource to come to the table with solutions, so on and so forth. I'm just making the point that I don't think Eversource is the culprit. I think Eversource is passing along the prices they have to pay, and the prices they have to pay are probably out of proportion to the cost of natural gas. That's my premise, and I just want to take a minute to get that out on this episode of the show.
And you may very well be right.
All.
The state, when what they call deregulated, what I would call re-regulated, the electricity business back late 90s, circa 2000, prior to my coming to Wallingford, they chased the Eversources and the UIs of the world out of the generation business. So they don't control that cost any longer.
Right.
They're at the whims of a vendor.
Yeah. So when I threw out the term, 15 minutes ago, whether I asked whether or not there's profiteering and price gouging, which is the impolite word for what might be going on. Eversource put out a bulletin not long ago, and it said preceding the procurements for 2023 electric supply, Eversource noted the authorities, the regulatory authorities, that, listen to the choice of words, the price of supply for a given load segment was not reflective of market pricing. That is, bidders seek to leverage market conditions to extract, strong word, to extract a premium to provide supply. It's a polite allusion to the possibility of profiteering. Any thoughts? And then we'll close out the episode.
I suppose it's possible.
And others would agree. Okay, folks, you got it. Now you know all about the electricity market in Connecticut. It's the price of natural gas. It's pipeline issues. It's, hard to get liquefied natural gas to places where it's needed. Prices go up. Prices go up in Wallingford, too. They're not immune to that, but certainly not as bad as other places in the state. Rolling blackouts are a possibility if the weather gets really cold for a long period of time. If a vortex comes down from the North Pole, look out. And that's the story. Rick, thanks for coming on the Citizen Mike Show. We appreciate it.
Happy to do so, Mike.
And thank you for watching. We do appreciate it. WPEA puts the Citizen Mike Show up on its channel at 9 at night, so we say if it's 9 o'clock at night, it's Citizen Mike, and also watch the Citizen Mike Show on YouTube. Good night, everybody. Thanks again, Rick Hendershot.